welcome to the channel. My name is Annalisa and today I am reviewing 7, I think, asexual / aromantic books for you. And I planned since like January something to read a bunch of aspec books this month because last year someone in our community did Aspec April, which was a readathon focusing on books with characters on the asexual or aromantic spectrums, and so I didn't see anything about that readathon happening this year, but I still thought it was a good time to just read a bunch of those types of books all at once, and I have really enjoyed my time. It has been really special to see so much representation of people who are like me, and even people who are not like me but who are somewhat similar but have their orientation manifesting slightly differently. And I hope to bring a little bit more awareness of these, I think, lesser known books. Several of these are indie published and most of them are ones that I did not find on the more popular aspec recommendations videos because I requested a bunch of books from those videos for this month, but my library was closed before I could get them, so I had to get a bunch of ebooks. So then since I was getting a bunch of ebooks anyway, I decided to branch out and just get some indie books. I found some of them through Twitter friends because I have a few Twitter friends who are asexual writers, and one of them was very prolific, so I have 2 books that I read by her. And then I found several more by talking with various asexuals on Twitter, and then there's also at least one Goodreads list of books with asexual and aromantic representation. And I really did want these characters to be like the main characters or be heavily involved in the story, so I kind of filtered through that because I didn't really want to read one where there was a token ace character. That wasn't really what I was looking for. One more thing, this may or may not be a chocolate popcorn eating mukbang depending on how easy it is to eat with lipstick, because I planned the eating of the popcorn before I remembered that my last mukbang I was not wearing lipstick. So I'm going to go in the order that I read them, and the first book that I read, if you can see that, is The Ice Princess's Fair Illusion, and this is by that Twitter friend of mine, Lynn E. O'Connocht, if that's how you say that. But this is a retelling of King Thrushbeard, which was not a story that I was familiar with. From the retelling, I'm getting that it's about a princess who rejects all her possible suitors for no real reason. For no reason that that her parents will accept. So her father, the king, declares that she will marry the first beggar who comes to the gates, and someone named King Thrushbeard disguises himself as a beggar so that he can marry the princess. The way that the aspec stuff comes in is that this princess, who doesn't want to marry anyone, doesn't want to marry anyone because she doesn't want to have sex with anyone, because she is specifically sex repulsed. Our King Thrushbeard character is actually aromantic, but she wants to marry this princess because she knows someone is going to, and she wants to protect her so that she doesn't get married to someone who will expect her to have sex with them. And she is also asexual but not sex repulsed, so it's a little bit different for her. And the way that this story is told is kind of funky in that it is in verse, and specifically it is in dialogue type verse. Let me show you a page of it. Can you see how there are lines of text and it switches back and forth like that? That's one side is one character, the other side is the other character talking. And so it is them recording like an audiobook version of their story and like taking down what happened. And so it can be a little confusing sometimes because they interrupt each other and some of them don't know the other person's entire story. And it is a little bit distancing from the story because it is told in kind of shorthand so that we don't get to know the characters or what is happening to them as deeply as when you are in like third person normal narrative. But the difference about this is instead of learning about them from their actual story, you learn more about their personalities from how they tell their story, and you learn more about how they love each other. And I ship them because of the way they talk to each other in the present telling their story rather than the actual plot of their story, which was a strange thing, but a really interesting thing and a very unique way of storytelling that I haven't seen before. One of the aspects that I didn't like so much is that the explanations of asexuality and aromanticism and queer platonic relationships, which is what these characters end up in, is quite heavy-handed. It's explained in way more specific detail than you would expect to find with two people who have definitely talked about this before in dialogue between them. So I really like much more light-handed discussion of these topics, and I prefer that it be told through the narrative and through characterization rather than actually spelled out in dialogue or explained so thoroughly. I prefer to be shown rather than told, which is a common thing for readers. But the part that was shown rather than told was their love for each other, and so I really enjoyed that aspect. Then by the same author we have Seafoam and Silence, which is actually her first book in this little series that she wrote, but the second one that I read because I just did it in that order. But this one is a retelling of The Little Mermaid, and this one is a fair amount longer, and it is also more deeply in the main character's perspective because she isn't telling her story verbally. It's more like we're inside her head and hearing her thoughts. And so I really like that because you can see what it looks like that. It's still being told in verse, but it's more like poetry rather than dialogue. And I felt like poetry was a really good way to express this character's really deep emotions because it talks about how she feels about her sisters, because the mermaid family that she comes from are all referred to as sisters. You find out somewhere in the middle of the story that they like breed with each other because they either change their sex when they need to have kids, or they just are all referred to as sisters no matter what part of sexual reproduction they play. They like to eat meat of all kinds, but they specifically like to eat people because they're some of the largest meat creatures that they can catch. This might not look very good on my teeth, but it's freaking delicious. It's just popcorn with melted chocolate on it. Semi-sweet specifically, because that's the only acceptable form of chocolate, except dark. This is a good way to get myself to eat fiber, because popcorn is full of fiber, but it's really dull when it's not covered in either butter or sugar. Anyway, the prose format works really good to talk about how she feels about her sisters and her family, and then how she starts to feel about the tall crabs is how they refer to humans. And I kind of liked that making up of a new word, and she also came up with a word for ships that's like the moving land, as opposed to the still land is what we would call land. And I really like it when authors do a good job of coming up with different individual terms that make sense for this other culture, because with different languages, even when you translate it, different cultures have some words that can't be translated or are translated slightly inaccurately because they think of things differently, and I really like when authors think of that. So this girl goes from thinking of the tall crabs as something that her sisters are good at eating to something that she might eat to something she's curious about because they like talk to each other, and maybe they're not just animals to be eaten, maybe they're intelligent like us. And it goes through her long transition from tall crabs, humans being prey, to them being interesting, to caring about them and trying to rescue them when they fall overboard, to actually wanting to trade her tail for legs and asking a sea witch, who is much nicer than the Disney version of the sea witch, by the way, to make this deal with her. And then the best part for me, even though I enjoyed all the rest, was at the end, post where the normal fairy tale ends, after she, in this case, does not turn into Seafoam, because that would suck. We go on to see her have some more plot that is just added on, and it deals with the fact that she and her prince are both aromantic and also both asexual, and her prince is sex repulsed, and so it goes through them figuring out what to do about the fact that he is supposed to get married because he's the prince so he can have kids, and it actually ends up with some polyamory representation where 3 people love each other very much but don't need to have sex. Also, there's a lesbian. That's the 3rd person. It's a lesbian. And I really, really loved that whole ending portion. It was just so happy and mushy, and I just really liked reading it. Then I read The Roommate by Ariel Cross, which is very short. I could probably read the whole thing out to you in 10 minutes, but it is about a succubus and an asexual who work together in a bar and figure out that it would work really well if they lived together, because the succubus doesn't like to be hit on by his roommates all the time, and they just get on really well. And so it's mostly told in kind of sum-up form, where they're kind of like the dialogue verse. They're kind of telling you about what has happened between them, but there are 2 fully laid out scenes. One about the succubus, who is a guy. No, I don't know why he's not called an incubus. They talk about it in the story, but they don't actually explain it. The succubus defending the asexual at the bar where they work from a nasty customer, and then another scene later on where the asexual defends the succubus from a failed demon hunter. And it's just really sweet, a very short story about how they care about each other and take care of each other, and what it might be like if a succubus and an asexual live together. Next is the Fairy Godmother's Apprentice Wore Green, and this is another short story. I read a lot of short stories because I think there's more of them with Ace Rep. I think because when people finally started wanting Ace books, a lot of writers decided to actually write them, and then they wanted to write them very quick and get them out quickly, so they wrote short stories, whereas it's going to take us a few more years of wanting full-length Ace novels before we get a whole bunch of them. So this one is by Nikki Kyle, and it is a fairy tale type story about a fairy godmother's apprentice who comes to a little town that has had reports of dragon sightings and dragons like roasting the tops of buildings and stealing sheep. And so she comes there to try to figure out what's going on in this little town, does some investigations, finds out there's someone who is being married off, who really doesn't want to be married off, and figures out that the dragon and this girl might have something to do with each other. And my favorite parts of this are spoilers, but it basically just has to do with the lore of how dragons work in this story and how fairy godmothers work in this story. And both this girl who is in the town and doesn't want to get married and our fairy godmother's apprentice are asexual. One of them's aromantic. The whole town is super pushy, but we get to push back against them and against the heteropatriarchy, and it's very satisfying. In a ranking, I like that one better than The Ice Princess's Fair Illusion and The Roommate, but not quite as well as Seafoam and Silence, because I really, really loved Seafoam and Silence. Then we have Stranger by Sherwood Smith and Rachel Manija Brown, and this is one that I got from the Goodreads list of books with A-Spec rep. And this has a whole lot of LGBTQPA representation in it. We've got a fair number of lesbians, a fair number of gay people, all of which is totally accepted in this world, and an ace who I don't think is aromantic. And from the way she talks about it, asexuality isn't known very well in this world because she doesn't like name herself that or talk about how that's normal. She's kind of trying to figure out what's going on with her. So I really, really like this one. I actually blew through this one fairly quickly, and I just enjoyed it a lot. Like, I haven't enjoyed a book since The Gilded Wolves. Fortunately, the ending didn't ruin it for me in this case, so I wasn't left with a bitter taste in my mouth. So this is set in a post-apocalyptic world where we've had some sun flares and some kind of either radiation or chemical disaster that has made all electronics stop working around the world and has also made everything mutate weird. So about a third of humans mutate to have special powers or weird biological things. It seems that these are never like in the disability category, like, or sometimes they have a downside, but they're almost always pretty much positive. They're called being changed. And like, one is a girl got claws for a hand, one is a lady got a really weird half skull face, but she can also run super fast and has a lot of stamina. One girl has telekinesis, somebody has control over earthquakes, somebody has wind powers, a whole bunch of widely varied stuff, and it's something that happens either when you go through puberty or when you get pregnant or when you have menopause, because you're going through hormonal fluctuations and it's somehow associated with those. But everything else in the world has also gone kind of wonky. The plants have gone wonky. So like there are these crystal trees that like shoot you with shards of crystal, and then if they like touch you or get inside you, they kill you and turn you into a new tree. And those are the weirdest plants. There are other weird plants too, and there are a lot of weird animals, like giant snakes that are intelligent and like team up with pit mouths, which are a lot like that thing in Star Wars that they try to throw them into, that is a beak that comes out of a pit. And like there are raccoons who build dams and houses. And so a lot of extra intelligent creatures, and also a lot of just funky creatures. The cats specifically have flying squirrel skin between their legs for some reason. So I found that really, really fun, and I also really liked the approach that this took, because it isn't a dystopian post-apocalypse, it's a Wild West post-apocalypse. So a bit like some zombie apocalypse survival stories. In my favorite ones, people form sort of a Wild West society, and because there's so few people in the world now, because most of them died, it kind of goes back to when there were only like 1,000 people in town, all the towns were far away from each other, and the wilderness was a big thing. And people had sheriffs and mayors, and they didn't like have a higher authority to appeal to when things went wrong. And in this particular town, they've done pretty well with their leaders. So they have some that are kind of jerks, but not really horrible, corrupt despots. And I really like that. And we follow 5 different characters, and sometimes that can be handled badly, but it was handled really well in this book, in my opinion, because they all had different parts of the story to tell, because they all worked in different ways for their community. Some of them were warriors, one of them was a mechanic, one was a stranger who had been an explorer and had found a book with recipes for special weapons in it, and one is the daughter of the mayor, who is also the record keeper for the town. And so to get the entire story of what's going on in these different parts of the town that make everything work together, we have to see through these different kids' perspectives. They're all teenagers. And I really liked how that was handled. I enjoyed all of the characters. One of the characters is very annoying because she's quite racist in a different way than usual. There is a distinct lack of outwardly shown racial discrimination between like people's different colors of skin, etc. There's a lot of diversity racially wise. There are Japanese people, Jewish people, Hispanic people, black people. There seems to be, and there's not like it, and there doesn't seem to be a majority of white people or a majority of white culture. There's a lot of mixing of all these various cultures, and it's talked about as if that's normal, and it's like not considered normal to have a mostly white culture. But since there are about 1/3 of people who are changed and have these weird abilities, some people don't like them, and sometimes they don't like normal people who haven't been changed. So there's some distress there, and that is sometimes used as kind of a, what's it called, metaphor for racism. So this character who's annoying doesn't like people who are changed, and is a jerk in some other ways too, and she's super fake because she is the daughter of the mayor and one of the other leaders of the town. She's been taught to be super fake and present a certain image, and so you're not supposed to like her, but as the story goes on, you kind of figure out why she is the way she is and have some more sympathy for her. And she also improves in some ways and makes some positive changes, and is shown to actually care about other people more than it seems she does. I know I have chocolate on my fingers. And everybody else who is a perspective character is really likable and just enjoyable. We also get a polyamorous relationship once again involving the ace person in the story. And another thing I liked was how normalized lack of gender roles were. Like a lot of times people would talk about their mother having this job and their mother teaching them this, and they had a lot of warriors' job and important roles in society, like the mayor is a woman and the sheriff is a woman, and 3 out of our 5 main characters are women. And it's just completely normalized and not shown to be unexpected in any way that these women have this much power and are warriors as well as political leaders. And I really enjoyed that. And I also really liked the racial and cultural diversity. I just really enjoyed it. And the main conflict is about a bad guy who is a despot and rules in other towns, trying to come and take them over. And so there is a prolonged battle sequence at the end that is like a mass battle, so they're under siege, and that is one of my favorite types of battle scenes, and it was done really well. And all the individual battle scenes with smaller groups or individuals were also written well, and I just really liked it. Like, this is something I would have totally loved to read back when I was in my zombie apocalypse phase, when I was like a tween. And I like made up a bunch of stories and ideas about people who survived and built like a fort and had their own little, smaller than this, but their own little society, and how they survived and interacted with each other. And I wish I would have had this book back then, because I would have gone nuts for it. And I really like that this reminded me of that and my own sort of imaginative place that I haven't been to in a long time. Then we have an audiobook, which, by the way, I have found that listening to audiobooks while I play The Sims is really cathartic, because The Sims doesn't take too much brain power, and audiobooks also only take a certain amount of brain power, so combined they work really well together. And I find The Sims in general really cathartic, so if I can feel like I'm accomplishing something by reading a book while I'm doing the cathartic thing for, you know, several hours a day, that feels really good. So I listened to a very long audiobook called Perfect Rhythm, which I discovered from somebody or other's recommendations of Ace Books. I think it was on Twitter. Go Twitter, people, helping me find these books. Y'all did a good job. The audiobook is like 16 hours long. I think it was because she just reads slow, because the word count on it is like 100,000, which is about half the length of A Court of Mist and Fury. So it's only about 400 pages, and I can speed it up to 2 times speed without losing the plot. So I think that the lady just read it quite slow. But it was also just a really nice, long, slow romance that took its time. A lot of romances are not 400 pages, especially ones with a really simple concept. Popcorn kernels really like to get stuck in my throat. Not kernels, the little husks. You know, those things that get stuck between your teeth? They're getting stuck in my throat and I can't talk. But the concept for this one is a famous singer falls in love with a regular person when she comes back to her hometown, which is a classic trope, which is not one of my favorites. I've enjoyed a few movies with that trope, but I feel like it works better for me in movies than in books, because, you know, they're shorter and it's kind of more acceptable to be silly. But despite not loving the trope, I absolutely adored this book because it is a lesbian romance between an allosexual and an asexual. And those are my absolute favorites. And it was so sweet and mushy. And things were spelled out a lot, but it's a lot more natural because it was the asexual, who's the normal person, explaining to the allosexual who had never heard of it before, so it made more sense that she actually had to explain more. And also the allosexual doing some internet research, so it made sense that she would read sort of verbose explanations. And I really enjoyed how sweet our allosexual was. What's her name? Leo and Holly is the other girl's name. And so Holly is a nurse. She's not a nurse. She's a nurse's aide or something like that. Maybe an LPN. She's not an RN because she stays overnight to take care of Leo's father, who has had a stroke. Nobody pays RNs to watch one patient overnight who is not in the ICU. That's expensive. She actually does what I do without certification, which is be a caretaker. I was a caretaker for a paraplegic woman for about 6 months a couple of years ago. And so Holly basically has a job that I have done. And that was a little weird because there were some inaccuracies. Although most of the inaccuracy was that she was judgmental of Leo not coming home and seeing her father, and she actually recognized that that was unprofessional. But before she recognized that, I was like, you are being so unprofessional right now. That is not how a caretaker is supposed to behave. You don't judge your patient's family. That's totally not your business. But eventually she figured out that it wasn't her business and addressed to herself, I need to stop being unprofessional. And after that, I was more okay with it. There were a few other medical inaccuracies that bothered me a bit. But I was able to look past that because they weren't vital to the plot, so it's a lot more irritating when the plot hinges on an inaccuracy, so that kind of makes the whole thing fall apart. But in this case, they were superfluous to the story, so I was able to ignore them and just really enjoy the sweet, soppy goopiness that was going on in the romance. So some goopy, silly things they do. They go for a picnic by the riverside, and Leo buys all Holly's favorite foods to take with her on this little cute date. And they go out and sit on the roof together because that's Leo's favorite spot from when she was a kid. And they're just freaking adorable with each other. There's some angst, mostly having to do with Holly being afraid that she won't be accepted as an asexual because she's had multiple relationships with people who were nasty to her about it. So she's scared of trying another relationship. But other than that, there's very little angst. And I just really like that because it wasn't a big rocky relationship that had a bunch of ups and downs. It was kind of a steady progression, and you felt like the whole time you knew it was going towards a happy ending, and I just really like that. It's very comforting. So it was just really pleasant to listen to while I was playing my Sims. And the way that Leo is so accepting and accommodating Holly's asexuality, as she should be, but as is totally not the norm for how people expect to behave in a romantic relationship, was just so encouraging to me. So those last two are my highest recommendations, but I enjoyed all of these. I'm gonna put a list of other Acebook books I know of. 3 that I've read are Beyond the Black Door, Let's Talk About Love, and The Lady's Guide to Petticoats and Piracy. I liked Beyond the Black Door a lot. I liked Petticoats and Piracy a fair amount, and I didn't like Let's Talk About Love much at all. I just didn't ship the romance, and it was like a romance book, so eh. But other books that I know of that have rep that I haven't read yet include Tosh Hart's Tolstoy, Radio Silence, and Summerbird Blue, I think? I'll put a list down in the description, but I forgot to tell you, I have also been reading Unburied Fables, which is a collection by Creative Aces Publishing that is a whole bunch of fairy tales retold with LGBTQPA characters. Specifically, it's got about 75% A-spec, with others including at least 2 lesbian stories and a trans story. And I've enjoyed a lot of them so far. Some of them are kind of boring because they're the exact vague version of the fairy tale, just with an ending that's switched out to be asexual or aromantic. But some of them have been really creative, and I really enjoyed the trans one, for example. I'm about 50% of the way through it, and I would recommend it if you would like to just see fairy tales but not straight. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you would like to read any of these. And let me know what you've been reading lately or what else you've been doing to take up your extra time lately. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Bye!